The sun is getting lower, and my windows face the west, and so light is streaming in. I hope it doesn't interfere with the visual quality too much. I want to talk about our experiential tendencies uh, and look at them in an evolutionary perspective. I take it as a general truth about evolution that um, the things that get selected for can be inferred to have been life-serving in some way that was sufficient to mean that those things were able to, the things that had whatever, were more likely to get their DNA into the future than the equivalent in the species that didn't. Um, the, the species evolve through the non-random survival and reproduction of some variants and not others. I think that's really just basically there, right in the heart of Darwinism, Darwin's theory of evolution. There can be various kinds of selection that take place. I think the tail of the peacock is said to be not because it was so great for surviving with such a big tail, but because of sexual selection, the peacocks that had the most magnificent displays got a chance to get their DNA into the future because the peahens selected the better displays. I know that the selection isn't always for what's adaptive in the sense that we usually think of as being life-serving, and not everything about us is doing anything useful. Some things are residual, like we humans have at the base of our spines, we got a little something. That's what's left of having had a tail. We had ancestors that had tails. We don't, but kind of do. So that's not what I'm talking about. But there are other kinds of things that I don't think fall into those categories. And at the moment, I can't think of what other categories I should mention as exceptions to the rule that what has been selected to be part of us is there because it proved to help our ancestors survive and to get progeny into the world with their blueprint, who are also able to survive and get progeny into the next generation and so on. I mean, we're all descended from a whole bunch of 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, 16 great great grandparents, and so on ad infinitum. All of them having succeeded in getting their DNA into the future in offspring, and that's I think that's a good definition of life serving. That anything that increases a creature's chances of survival should be regarded as life serving. Okay, that's what I say. I mean, I also am concerned about the experiential aspect of things where the dichotomy is not the big picture stuff of survive or not survive, life or death, but is experiential in terms of flourish and thrive versus agony and misery or whatever. That's, life serving also is that which makes us feel fulfilled. That's from within. From without, life serving is what helps us get okay. So we have a world view that's very strong in the Western world, a secular worldview, people who don't get their belief systems from uh, received authority, you know. And in this secular worldview, I have good reason to be able to assert this because of my interactions with people over decades. There's a major part of the secular worldview that doesn't believe that the experience is a source of is a way to understand reality. The way we experience things is subjective, and subjective also makes things like our judgments of value a matter of opinion. I think that's dangerously wrong and philosophically erroneous, with an error, with it being possible to demonstrate the nature of the error. I'll do a little bit of that, but if you want to see if I can demonstrate that error, please go to my website, abetterhumanstory.org. And I've talked about this. You can Google, I guess, experiential tendencies, and you'll see another effort of mine to talk about this. I'm not going to go over some of that same ground about how the experiential tendency in us to have a better and worse spectrum has been selected for. And it provides a good enough foundation to generate a real version of the moral dimension that requires our honoring it and using it for guidance. It's not merely subjective. There's room for plenty of that, but it's not like only the objective is real. In fact, the idea of value, better and worse, being objective, I mean, if you look at it, it ends up making no sense. You got to have somebody or something that's experiencing things as better or worse, or otherwise nothing matters. Anyway, I'm not going to go over that ground again. That's enough. Nor am I going to go over the ground that shows that part of the human genome is a capacity to experience things in a spiritual dimension, a capacity for spiritually transformative experience, which says that we have that capacity. It is factual that we have that capacity. From that fact, we can infer that it's there because somehow the ancestors that had that somehow ended up acting in a way which led to their surviving more than the ones that didn't, which makes it life-serving. Real, important, life-serving. I can show that about moral and spiritual dimension. And in the previous one, I also talked about laughter and humor as an experiential dimension. It's sort of part of who we are as humans, and asked the question, why is that there? And also about the pretty universal human tendency to find music meaningful through history, across cultures. Why is that there? And on that one, well, anyway, I speculated about both of them. I don't claim to have laid either of them to rest, but this time I want to talk just about one. Oh, I also have talked about why did we evolve to get pleasure from beauty? I think you can say that is something that is an experiential tendency built into us by evolution. The idea of beauty is something that we respond to. I don't think it has to be taught to a kid. Even and we're not the only species that has an idea of beauty. There's the bowerbirds, but anyway, we have it, and I think that we have it for a reason which is definitely connected with our being humans, namely that it helps motivate us to try to make things the way they're supposed to be. As cultural animals, we're more vulnerable to making bad decisions. We aren't stuck in a niche to the extent that other forms of life are, and so it's adaptive for us to be motivated When we say something like, isn't that beautiful when we see, a family together that everybody loves everybody, or just you make a whole list of like human things in our lives that we call beauty. It isn't just, Michelangelo's David or Bach's Brandenburg number 5, we find a lot of stuff beautiful. And I think that the love of beauty helps motivate us to avoid letting things get ugly. When we talk about today's Republican Party and what it's doing in the world, I find that I continually am thinking in terms of ugly. And when I say that my Better Human Story contains as its sort of foundation piece something that shows that the ugliness we see in human history isn't human nature writ large. The sentence I use is the ugliness, the ugliness, the ugliness, appealing to that experiential tendency to want things to be beautiful. Yeah, I don't think it's just, an erotic realm that we find things beautiful. Well, that is a very powerful one. You can see how that would connect with getting our DNA into the future. But we got plenty of other things that are beautiful. I mentioned Willie Mays' catch in the 1954 World Series over his shoulder, and wheeling and turning, throwing the ball back to second base. I mean, ballet is no better in terms of beauty than what Willie Mays did out there on that ball. And there's a beauty to the American Constitution. There's a beauty to the notion that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And there's a beauty in the idea of love thy neighbor as thyself. There's all kinds of beauty. And I think we respond to all of them in some ways the same in terms of that's why we call them all beautiful. I mean, that's not the only thing we ever call any of them. But we do call all of those kinds of things beautiful, and I think that that's good for a cultural animal to do because we are in danger of making mistakes and going the wrong path. Well, the only one I want to talk about today, besides, I guess I've talked about 5 just now in an abbreviated form, and I'm not going to be long about talking about this, but I wrote a piece which you can find on the web if you want to see how I do it when I'm doing the discipline thing I do when I write. It's called What's Interesting? ? And what I say is that we are given an experiential tendency, inborn, meaning selected for by the biological evolutionary process. I mean, I'm imagining that we're pretty much the same as before civilization. I believe that that's understood, pretty much. I mean, we got things like more people are able to digest milk because of what happened in Europe 8,000 years ago or something like that. But basically, a baby today has got the same experiential tendencies as a baby born in the Stone Age. We're born to find things interesting. I mean, kittens are born to find things interesting. Look at a kitten exploring, and puppies they find things interesting, and little toddlers going around, they find everything interesting. I remember when my first baby was born and became a toddler. We lived in Tucson at that time, and I had completed my doctorate, and my first wife was a graduate student at the University of Arizona in clinical psychology. And my job, it was my turn to sacrifice my focus on work to allow her to focus on work, and I went all over Tucson with my son, and it's so wonderful to encounter the world with a little child whose mind is just sort of That line in Shakespeare's The Tempest, what a brave new world that has such creatures in it. I mean, he was finding everything brave and new in the world. And that was very exciting to discover things through him anew. That's what we are programmed to do. And I think, just to tie the evolutionary knot here, it is adaptive, life-serving, evolutionarily useful to find things interesting. The people who find things interesting learn about their world. They're curious. Curiosity. There's that old saying, curiosity killed the cat. Well, from an evolutionary perspective, it may be true that sometimes curiosity gets people or cats into trouble. But that curiosity wouldn't be in that cat if, for the most part, in the ancestral past, being motivated to be curious and finding things interesting hadn't made it more likely that they would survive. Yeah, I mean, you bring a box into the house. You open the box from Amazon or something like that, and you take out the contents and you leave it on the floor, and you come back in a minute, and the cat has jumped into the box, and their curiosity isn't killing the cat. I think it's expressing what's really useful for a cat to do in general. Whenever it sees something new, I mean, sometimes a cat will be very cautious about what's new. And I don't know that I can articulate what the triggers are for. I'm from being curious to being wary. It depends on what the new thing is and what impression it makes. But curiosity to kill the cat is not a general truth. Likewise with us humans. It does concern me. It always has. I think something not good happens in a lot of people's lives where the curiosity they had as children gets killed fairly early, either by parents saying, don't bother me, or schools teaching in wrong ways. I think it's probably okay that adult human beings are not as fully motivated by curiosity as children, because after all, if you're living in a particular world, you got to learn about that world. And once you've learned about that world, you don't need to study it quite so much. So I expect there to be some fallout about the impulse of finding things interesting. But there are a lot of ways in which human beings maintain childish traits. It's called, it's called neoteny. Like, if you look it up, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do justice here, but the neoteny is like the distribution of hair. The naked ape, I guess, is some aspect of our neoteny. We tend to be more hairless, and we also do, I think, have more playfulness and more curiosity than let's say other primates. I'm not positive about that, but there was a guy once who was sort of a patron of mine for a while, and I was continuing to pursue the road I took with the Parable of Tribes. It was really not at all given that I could make ends meet making money doing what I do. And there have been a couple of people who have stepped forward at times and said, we want you to be able to do what you do. And that helped me to survive, not lavishly, but frugally. And the one guy, I don't know if I should name names, the couple is no longer alive. Well, I will. His name was John Morse and his wife was Libby. I want to express my gratitude to them for a few years in the 90s when they made it easier for me to continue to pursue this better human story that I say is my life's work. Anyway, he had a lot of emphasis on neoteny, of seeing us as a species as having maintained certain childish traits. And I know that I'm still curious, and I know a lot of people who are still curious. So maybe, maybe there isn't all that much decline in it, in us, in a natural way. Um, because maybe that's because the human world is rather complicated, and we really do have to make a lot of choices, and it's not, it's not so confined as it is with animals that are more governed by instinct and are in a more predictable world. That's the same niche that they evolved into. I don't know. All these are speculations, but I know that I keep studying. I study the science. I get science news every week. I go to science sites, and I want to know. And I want to know about history, and I want to know about the people. And I think we're more likely to survive the better we understand our world. So I think that our finding things interesting is a important inborn experiential tendency. It's not that the things that we find interesting are interesting in themselves, like if there were, I mean, they're in laboratories around the world. There are scientists that are looking into this and that and this and that, and they're deeply interested in how the atom is put together and what the particles are, and what the James Webb Telescope is telling us about the galaxies out there and the beginnings of time. They're really interested in all that, and you could, make a deep list of all the things that people find interesting, huge list. There's almost no limit to what people find interesting. If there were nobody around, no humans, no puppies, no kittens, no baby chimpanzees or baboons, or if it was nothing that had the capacity to find things interesting, what would it mean to say there was something interesting in that world where there was nobody to find anything interesting? I think we got to think about the experiential realm in a different way, in an evolutionary perspective, which gives it a lot more respect than it gets. That because they're there, we know that they're life-serving. And because they're life-serving, we really got to pay greater honor to them, especially because, we're really in a battle between the forces of life and the forces of death. I claim that it's a toss-up whether or not in the next not so many generations human civilization will destroy itself or will get its act together so it can survive for the long haul. That's a version of life versus death. And the forces at work to determine it are could be described as the forces that are life-serving versus the forces that are death-serving, or the forces that build wholeness, which is what life thrives with, or the forces that spread a pattern of brokenness, which destroys and degrades life, which amounts to saying a battle between good and evil. So I think it's important to realize that these experiential tendencies, that this realm of experience needs to be honored. They're there for a reason. And that reason seems, I don't know, I have a little trouble with music and humor, but the other ones, you can make a really reasonable case that the reason they're there is that from those tendencies, if we are guided by those tendencies, we will do things which increase the chances that human civilization will get its act together. It'll be life-serving. We will survive for the long haul and not destroy ourselves. Honor the good versus evil choice. listen to the messages that one can encounter if one has this capacity for transformative spiritual experience. Listen to the spiritual truths that from which oneself or other people come back from such experiences. Because you can tell that on balance, the totality of what human beings have reported seems to point in the direction of, of wholeness. That's why that tendency is there. Similarly with beauty, similarly with interestingness. The evolutionary perspective shows both how a force of destruction arises in a system that a civilization creating species plunges into when they extricate themselves from the natural order, enter into disorder by inventing their own way of life, which is a whole new life form. It creates a whole new situation. It's got a whole new dynamic. And the evolutionary perspective tells us that in addition to the destructive force that will arise with that, inevitably, we also have something inside of ourselves that we can use to guide ourselves as we struggle to overcome that force and to create a better human story going forward so that we don't destroy ourselves in a nuclear holocaust or through climate change or some other environmental catastrophe, but we get we order our civilization in ways that prevent ourselves from destroying ourselves and allow us as a new life form on this planet to make it for the long haul, to thrive, to find fulfillment, and to be at harmony with the rest of the needs of the living world. That's what the better human story is about. The evolutionary story tells us we should not be thinking about the moral dimension or the spiritual dimension or the whole experiential realm as merely subjective. Evolution has left an imprint on us that is a clue to things that we should attend to, including finding things interesting. Thank you.